You've tuned in for the Wing to Sour podcast, and you're probably expecting a charismatic American to start off with wit, repartee, and banter. But things are different on this one. So I'm kicking off. I'm Mark. He's Brandon. And I'm going to start this off in the manner of a British Broadcasting Corporation newsread with zero charisma.
Welcome to the Winged Hussar Pubcast. From fantasy to sci-fi to history and horror, your hosts are about to take you on a journey through all things Winged Hussar Publishing. Sit back and relax as we talk about writing, gaming, as well as interview some of your favorite authors. Let's wing it.
So now I've got that out of the way, we are going to be talking about something a bit different this time, which is, handing over to Brandon, what are we here to talk about?
Some book some guy wrote, I hear it's got stuff in it.
No.
It's got characters, that type of stuff. Oh, wait, no, hold on.
You heard it here first. You heard it here first. Some book that some guy wrote with characters in, as I promised, something a bit different. Rebirth of Courage. Now, we've spent, I say weeks, it's been months. Has it been years yet? Have we hit anniversary one yet? I don't think we have.
We have. I think we're
while.
on 2 years.
2 years? Good gosh.
Something like that. It's close. We're at least over a year. I know that.
Yeah. And in all that time, we have spoken about the correct use of the Oxford comma. We have slated first-time authors far more than we should have done. And we've brought a succession of charismatic Americans on to talk about mainly Kings of War and Infinity. So on this time, we're going to bring on the most charismatic of all Americans, and we're going to talk about your own project. So, something a bit different. I'm stalling for time because I'm struggling with IT, and there's my questions. Right, so kicking off with then, Rebirth of Courage. For the completely new reader, what is it?
So, beyond just being the head editor for sci-fi and fantasy at Winged Hussar Publishing and being the co-host here with you, I did write my own novel. It was one of the first things we published under Winged Hussar Publishing. It was before I had any real experience under my belt as far as editing goes. So it was the first fantasy novel we published. And that came out in 2011, I think. And to me, it was perfection. It couldn't get any better. And then all the cracks started showing. I'm like, nope, this is needing to be a very serious edit. And that's when I met you. And you said, oh no, it's all garbage. We got to start out. No, I'm joking. That's when you looked at it and said, I see what you're doing, but we can make it better, which echoes everything that I say to authors. So I was like, this is perfect. Somebody who's going to give me actual feedback. So the editor finally got somebody who can read this and give me actual feedback. And so as of this past summer, August 2024, we finally relaunched my novel, which I'm very happy to finally have back in print because, going to conventions, everything, I can say, look at all these books we publish and look at all these amazing authors we have, but I didn't have anything of my own to say, like, look at this besides anthologies. So now I'm happy to at least say I have my novel back in print again. So Rebirth of Courage is a fantasy novel. So I'm a child of the 90s, and I grew up playing RPGs, as we've talked about numerous times on this podcast. Inspiration is completely from a RPG standpoint, a video game standpoint, more than it is taking emphasis and inspiration from any novel per se. So if you grew up and you loved video games, especially RPGs like Final Fantasy and Fire Emblem and all those good games, that's where a lot of the inspiration of my novel came from. And I had to, as you know, Mark, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but I had to take a different approach when actually editing my novel, because I had to say, all right, this is not a video game, this is a novel. And there are things that work and there are things that don't work. But I'll give you guys, if you have not ever heard of my novel and you just listen to the podcast and you just like to listen along as we ramble on about the variety of topics, I'll give you the Amazon blurb about my novel. In a world that thrives off the concept of magic-infused crystals, a young man by the name of Darkflare Omni finds himself heir to a rune that allows him to harness the power of fire. Upon conjuring his first spell, the lock upon which Darkflare's long-sleeping memories of how his parents died and how his hometown was destroyed becomes unsealed. Despite now having answers that fill in large gaps of unaccounted time, Darkflare is left with more questions. If his parents sealed the memories away, why did they suddenly unlock? And what does it mean that his dormant rune, that he always considered a birthmark, awakened now? Seeking answers and wanting to learn more about his newfound magic, Darkflare and his allies set off on a quest to stop the demonic Marked Ones who have threatened to indoctrinate some of the land's nobles to their dark cause. This young man, who has lived a secluded life in the forgotten town of Crescentia, must learn what it means to embrace the company of others that walk alongside the path fate has laid out for them. He must learn to harness the power of his rune and find strength in being a dragoon. One of the most difficult things beyond that is trying to set the genre and age, because I had a really hard time doing that for a very long time because I didn't write it necessarily with a genre and age in mind. I just wrote it as, this is the story I've been trying to tell. This is everything that I've been working towards my whole life. So I'm going to define that now because why not? It's a fantasy novel. It's aimed at young adults, but again, in a perfect world, anybody could pick it up and read it if you enjoy fiction and you enjoy a story about characters and you enjoy reading about something other than what's happening in real life.
Okay, I mean, going slightly off kilter here, because sometimes if you're introducing someone to a new franchise, whatever it might be, sometimes you've got to kind of grossly oversimplify, because otherwise you just end up rambling on and on and on when all you want to do is kind of say, this is roughly what it is. We talk about Kings of War a lot, and it's like, if someone hadn't heard of Kings of War, you could say Tolkien, kind of like Lord of the Rings stuff. If you were going to go infinity, you wouldn't be that far off by mentioning something like Blade Runner. So Rebirth of Courage, if you were to just in a snappy short phrase compare it to a really well-known kind of thing, zeitgeist, whatever, what would you go for?
I think the best thing I could say is if Final Fantasy met Dragon Ball Z.
Cool. Both of which have obviously got spiky-haired heroes beating people up. So
which is my protagonist, a spiky-haired hero.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is. It's got that very JRPG feel, hasn't it? And this, as we've spoken about kind of off mic, this isn't something that's just materialized kind of in the last 2 years. This has got a bit of a backstory, a bit of a pedigree behind it. So what was the origins of the actual concept of this story?
So my introduction to gaming and Dungeons and Dragons and all of that stuff is kind of different than most people. When I was in middle school, we moved halfway across the state to a new area, and I kind of felt lost because I had lost all my friends and, learning about a new community, all this stuff. So I was already starting to get involved with online. I mean, this is when AOL was huge. This is when chat rooms were big and everything. So in order to kind of try to find a new group of friends and a new place of belonging, I guess you could say, I started trying to go into chat rooms. Also, I was staying at my aunt and uncle's house while my parents were moving things, and I got access to chat rooms for the first time, much younger than I should have had access to. But anyway, I was looking to start a chat room about video game talk. So I think I named it, I forget what I named it, but I named it something that I was really into video games, and it was Final Fantasy discussion or something, I forget. And somebody came in and they were basically role playing as you would in D&D, but in chat based format. So I learned about basically role-playing as you would in Dungeons & Dragons, but in chat room. So it was called chat-based roleplay. And it blew my mind because I'm like, you're creating a story in a chat room and you're just creating whatever you want, interacting with people, whatever you want. It's kind of like how you're online and you wear a mask. Well, now you're actually in a setting where you can create your own character and do whatever. I was so fascinated by this whole concept that I stayed up almost the entire night role-playing as Darkflare in a tavern and just waiting for people to come in and interact with them and just create this new world that I didn't even know existed. Just playing a character, interacting with others as a character. I mean, it's the prequel to MMOs. It's the prequel to, online gaming at all. There was none of that back when I was a kid. I'd heard of Dungeons and Dragons, but I didn't really know much about it. So I was just floored by it. So I continued doing that for about 10 years, and we had a group of people who, people would come and leave all the time, and there was a mainstay cast of people for a very long time. Up until the end, we had a pretty core cast of 5 people, and come high school and college and everything, it just didn't have time to do that anymore. But I had grown a story with my friends for 10 plus years, and it was my character, and I, felt so attached to the story, and all of us felt attached, and we still kept in contact, and we're like, there's got to be a proper end. We didn't end it. So I said, you know what? I'm going to write this as a novel. I'm going to take what we did and create the story we created. I'm going to make a novel out of it. And it was something I worked on tried to figure out how to do for so long, and it didn't work right now, no matter how I tried to do it. And then finally I was able to sit down and actually write it a full from start to finish. And I did that, I think, 3 different times, and 3 different times I didn't like it until I finally settled on, what originally went to print, and then that only tweaked slightly into what's currently in print. Originally I wanted to blend the line between a game, an anime, and an actual novel. And again, that's where it comes in, when I was working with you and you gave me suggestions on editing, that's when I really said, okay, I've now been working in novels for about 10 years. I now know what makes a good novel and what doesn't make a good novel. I hadn't touched my original Rebirth of Courage from the original print in a long time. So I looked at it and I was like, oh yeah, I absolutely can see how we can take this from what it originally was into how a proper novel should read. So the origins was, it was a concept of a game, a role play, that I then evolved into its own unique thing that now is a novel.
So you've already kind of touched a little bit on something here, but to dig a little bit deeper into something on that, you've started off with a long-term RPG, and you got that kind of running as a thread on one side. Writing a novel, a concise novel, short, sharp, hidden. It's almost like comparing the difference between a 10-season TV series and a movie. You need a completely different approach to storytelling in both. So with those, which are often conflicting agendas, how did that work? You've got something that's been running for years, and it's not a conventional story as such. How do you work that into a novel idea?
So originally, kind of sort of what I was saying is I took the original plot from the first day I started the role play, and I tried writing the novel in that. I had really detailed notes about everything that had happened over 10 years. I mean, honestly, my document for the Dragoon Clan series my notes document is over 300 pages. I have so many notes about this. So I originally took the start of the very first day we started role playing, and I tried writing it from there onward. Could not make it make sense. It just wasn't good. It just kept the characters I couldn't latch on to. There were characters in the very beginning who didn't stay for very long. Even though they had an impact in the beginning, they didn't have an impact in the overall story. So I tried making them more important than they were, and I was like, I don't have any attachment to these characters. I don't have any attachment to the plot. In early days, we just kind of went. It was just kind of like, okay, we're here, we're gonna just do random stuff. So it didn't translate well, and so I tried that 2 or 3 times, and then I just scrapped it and said, I got to start over from the beginning. So even the whole plot of I'll say the first quote unquote arc of the role play, I just scrapped that completely. So I'm like, it didn't make any sense. So what I ended up doing was I said, okay, where do I want to go? And what do I need to do? And what characters do I want to include? And so I took key characters, mostly the characters for the people who I still were in contact, who still am in contact with. And I said, okay, listen, I want to use this character that was in the role play, and I want to make him part of the novel. And I'm going to make him, take the core concepts that you had, but I'm going to rework it into its own original being. With basically it's just an Easter egg in the name. So this is the homage to your character. And they're like, oh yeah, that's great. Every single one of them signed off on it and said, yeah, absolutely. This was the whole, we played for the story. We did this so we could have the story. So everybody was on board with it. So I took what characters I wanted to see. And even to this day, I'm still in my giant notes document, scrapping future characters and reworking future characters. And I tried to make sure I hit certain areas for the characters. So I tried to make sure every character had an important part to play in the plot, and I would try to make sure they each were different in what I was bringing to the table. I didn't want to bring a whole bunch of really muscular, scowling guys and be like, oh yeah, this is half the cast, or big brutes who don't want to say anything, but they're real tough guys, but they're real sensitive people. I didn't want to bring a bunch of damsels in distresses. I wanted to make sure each one had their own niche and flowed differently in their own deep backstory. So pretty much before I started writing the novel, I said, writing the novel in its entirety. I said, I'm going to rework the entire thing. I'm going to look at what I want to bring and salvage, and I'm going to start from scratch. What lessons did I learn? Where do I want to go with the series? And where do I want to start? And I knew that the beginning of the novel, the first novel in the series, couldn't be like epic, world-bending, breaking scale. It needed to set the world and the tone, and it needed to start small and build its way up. So I started with, well, in any type of good movie, anime, show, game, whatever, when you start a series, what are the normal bad guys like? And, for the most part, it's always that joke that you see online where it's like, how a JRPG starts. And it's like, I'm going around the town fishing. How the JRPG ends. I'm going to take down God and break out his eye and save the world. It's like, there is a big jump in, like, epicness from the start to the end. And, while I didn't do the whole, I'm going to wander around the town and go fishing, I did decide to start more mundane and keep the enemies more grounded. As you and I worked on edits, I decided that I was a little too grounded in the sense where things were, originally I'll call it the quote unquote main enemies were humans, that were bandits. And then, when we were working on it, you were like, but you're having ordinary people kill ordinary people without really any remorse, or like, there was remorse, but to the degree of, we need a more evil bad guy than just people who are down on their luck. So that's when we shifted focus I shifted focus to the marked ones, because I decided, okay, they're going to take the guise of bandits because they are really these evil, like, demonic type creatures, and still keep them resembling humans, so it gives you into the world without being so in-depth of, I don't know what these things are, I can't figure it out type thing. So once I had reworked the concepts I liked and the characters I liked, I then sat down and said, all right, I'm going to lay the seeds for future stories. And for those who read the novel, and for those who will continue to read the series, there are Easter eggs, there are seeds that start in this first novel that will blossom into plots later on. But I worked it in the way as nothing was throwaway, in the sense of, if you catch it now and think, I should hold on to that, it'll pay off. But if you don't see it, then it's not gonna be like a hanging thread to say, well, what does this mean? And then anything I liked the concept of that I couldn't work, I tried to keep as Easter eggs. So I have a list of names and concepts I try to work in as Easter eggs wherever I can for lesser known characters, like secondary characters, and other things that that if I'm looking for a name drop, I can drop in easily to say, oh, I know what this homage means, but to anybody else, this is just a random name type thing.
So you've got these RPG concepts of kind of stuff that you work together with as a team from a long, long, long time ago. And then we end up diverting. So the essence is still there, the story's there, the characters are there. But what fell by the wayside? What didn't make it through to the final cut of your first story that was part of that RPG going way back?
I think I had to scrap almost everything. I think the only things that really remained were Dark Flare, and the fact that he had a pet wyvern named Oboro, and his best friend was named Attila. Everything else was scrapped. Everything I started from the ground up, and even those characters, for the most part, were reworked. Attila was massively reworked. Dark Flare got a physical rework. A lot of everything got reworked. One of the people who was part of the original group, who I still keep in contact with because she helps me, she bounces ideas off. I bounce ideas off of her. She gives me feedback. Some of the characters that she created are going to be are core characters in the second book. She said, if I was to keep everything as it was back then, absolutely wouldn't work now. The time has changed. What is appropriate has changed. What makes sense has changed. We were basically a bunch of teenagers just trying to create a story. And what I did take away from that was the ability to tell a story and to write, and learning words and learning how to better my craft. Because when you're working with a bunch of people who are basically all trying to tell a story, you feed off of each other and you learn how to do things better off of each other. And you say, oh, I like the way they do this, so I'm going to start doing this. And that was really the thing that, I took away from the original roleplay, was how do I improve my craft? And working with all these other people helped me do that, like any other writer's group nowadays. if you work with a bunch of people and you get feedback, you can, you will change the way you write, and you can get better from doing that. But everything else, I started over from the beginning, and two of the core concepts I can think about are, in the role play, the very first enemies were these basically giant Tengu crows. Like, if anybody's ever seen Power Rangers, the original Mighty Morphing movie from like 1995, the big bad crows, those were basically the villains in the very first arc of the role play. And I said, okay. Oh, also, the big bad of that first arc was Apocalypse from the X-Men. So Apocalypse from the X-Men was controlling a bunch of Tengu crows. If you can kind of see why it doesn't work. So I said, nope. I can't feasibly make this work for any reason. That's when I went to a more human aspect for the main enemies. Then we decided again to switch to the marked ones. So it was that type of shift. And then characters even. Originally, the main female protagonist, she's now named Luna, but originally she was named Renee. And she was more focused on a character that was originally in the roleplay named Renee. And as I grew the plot and as I was taking, more ownership of the characters and saying, this is how I need to make it different, this is how I need to make it more relatable and enjoyable, I decided that the character of Renee had outgrown any semblance of that one from the roleplay. So I scrapped that whole concept and I named her Luna, because that's the character name that Anna uses, my wife, in any type of like role play that we play. She goes with Luna. So I named the main protagonist. My main protagonist is Darkflare, after the character that I use, and my female protagonist is named after my wife's character. But as an Easter egg to that original character, I did keep Luna's middle name as Renee, so that way it was an Easter egg to what originally came. And if anybody read the first the first print version of Rebirth of Courage, they'll see that in the character bios as, hopefully an Easter egg.
So there's a lot of stuff falls by the wayside, and there's a lot of change, because you've gone from something which is created by a lot of people for a completely different purpose than a novel to a novel created by one person. But some stuff has made it through. So you still got the essence of this world created by a bunch of friends. So what was the most difficult part of keeping that, of keeping the essence and the feel and the vibe? And it's been bugging me. I was going to say, I was talking about it earlier, and I misused the word zeitgeist, and I've just got to apologize. It's been bugging me for the last 20 minutes, and I just need to get it off my chest. I used a pretentious word out of context, and that's horrific. Anyway, so the vibe, let's just go with that. What's the most difficult part of keeping that vibe that a whole bunch of people develop together to transition into that story?
Honestly, it was taking ownership of the characters. Like I said, we created this world together, and I said, I'm going to make it into a novel. And everybody agreed to it, and everybody said, yeah, go ahead, use my character. Like, you get, they're yours now. But at the same time, I was like, well, I wanted to maintain what made those characters. And in trying to do so, I was failing to really capture the novel, as opposed to a novel that was a role play. Best example I can think of, and Mark, you can understand this because you read that draft, but originally when I wrote the character of Roy, he was more of, the best word I can think of is bipolar. He was very serious and stern, but if he can make a sexist joke, he would, at the expense of one of the women, comically, anime style, smacking him in the face. And if anybody's seen Dragon Ball Z, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because that trope is played a lot. And that was what I was going for. But then, as a role play and a game between friends, yeah, you can get away with that. But as a novel, and for people who don't necessarily see those similarities, it looks bad. And you pointed that out to me, and I was like, 100% see it. I can't maintain that originality, or I can't maintain that factor that was in there and try to make it in a novel format. So I scrapped that whole concept of Roy's character, and I then made it so he's more Robin Hood-esque, and he's still got that wit and sarcasm to him, but he's more noble. So I had to do that with all the characters, more or less. I had to take I picked key elements that they had that the original a player created for them, but then I took it all and shaped it in a way that not dulled it down, but I sharpened the key aspects and I softened the ones that didn't work. And again, it goes back to one of my friends saying, those characters don't hold up nowadays. Like, they need to be changed. They need to be refreshed, because what was made sense to us and was fun as a kid is just nostalgia. It's not reality. So I had to say to myself, I now own these characters, and I need to make them in a way that makes sense for me and makes sense for my story. So I did my best to maintain aspects, but I had to reshape all of them. I ended up, as I said, a lot of the characters, I ended up looking at all the character lists and saying, in the very beginning, there were characters I wanted to use, and I was like, but it doesn't make sense. That was a cool character in theory, but how do I make that make sense in what the story I'm trying to tell? So I had to scrap a lot of characters, and I had to make new ones even. In the first novel, the main 6 protagonists of the Dragoon clan are all based off of player characters. Further novel, there are original characters, but basically I looked at it as says, well, what am I missing from the cast, and what do I want to see in the cast that I don't have a character for? So there was a couple of ones further on that I was able to create new characters for. And to this day, I still play with, as I'm looking, Dan Abnett gave me advice that said, don't plan out your novels in advance, because things will always change. And let me tell you, things have changed drastically. Even from the second novel, I have to rewrite almost the full draft of the second novel. But I play with the characters. I'm like, okay, do I want to put this character here? No. I want to take him out, and I want to put this character instead. No, I can still use him here. Nah, I don't know if I want to do that. So I have a list of characters I'm still trying to use, but I had to create original ones to fill in the gaps. So there was a lot that I tried to. The hardest thing, to go back to your original question, the hardest thing was just taking ownership of everything and trying to say, pay homage in the correct way while still saying, well, this is how it fits in with the current view and the current landscape.
So there's certainly, by the sound of it, some really difficult parts in keeping that essence of what you created with your friends moving forwards into this new format. Were there any easy parts to keep constant?
They weren't necessarily easy, but there were fun parts. There was when I decided to start from scratch and look at how the world works. I mean, this is something you and I have talked about on the podcast about original versus IP fiction. I had to think about everything in my world. Everything. I had to think about the kingdoms. I had to think about the rulers. I had to think about the map. I had to think about climate, religion. I had to start from the beginning. And I didn't necessarily base any of that off of anything. I just sat there and said, I remember one day I got a big poster board from work, and when I was working at the pharmacy before, I'm now at OMM, but I got a big poster board and I drew out a map, and I said, this is going to be the map of the Dragoon clan world. And I just had it sitting on my wall for years. And then I'm like, all right, here's the kingdoms. And I drew in the kingdoms, the 4 kingdoms. And then I said, all right, I need to start developing towns. So I just did dots, and I came up with names and backstories for all the towns. And now I've since made it digital. But then in doing that, I realized, well, that's one continent. There's a big world. I can't just say this is the main continent and that's it. There's got to be other things out there. So that was a whole nother thing about, okay, I'm going to allude to the fact that this is the main continent, but I'm not going to think about yet what other continents are out there. So then I had to think about religion. Well, it starts off with the prologue talks about the goddess of the world and how she's watching over things. Does everybody follow the goddess? If there are runes that give people powers and magical powers, and there's rune gods that are associated with those runes, do people worship those gods? How does magic work? If the dragoons have access to magic, how does the general populace have access to magic? There was all these things I had to think about, and while they're challenging, they were fun because I could sit there and go, okay, now I'm getting into the deep dive of my world, and I could look at I did look at some, like when I would get stumped at things, I would look at how different games and different books did certain aspects. Like magic magic was a tough one because I had to say, all right, how do other worlds handle magic? But in my creating, I didn't directly refer to those and say, that's how I'm going to do it. I just was like, all right, so I have general ideas about how other universes handle these topics. So now how do I want to do it? So I think even though it was one of the most challenging parts, it was the most fun. I think the easiest part was creating how I wanted to have Darkflare be, because he's my character and he's always been my character. And even though he's gone through so many changes over the years, I've always had a core concept of how I want him to look and act. So, and I guess installing that light fantasy, having the lighthearted jokes and the humor, and, not everybody dies, not everything's doom and gloom like so much dark fantasy nowadays. I think that was the easiest part, because that's part of who I am, and that's part of the fun that I have in any type of game or watching a movie or writing and reading a novel. It's the feel-good aspect of it, and that's what I really tried to instill with this. Today's episode is sponsored by On Military Matters, your source for new, used, and out-of-print books on military history, wargaming, and modeling. Check them out at onmilitarymatters.com and make sure to sign up for the weekly e-flyer. That's onmilitarymatters, all one word, .com.
Okay, so we're back from arguably, for some people, I don't get it, the highlight of every episode, the ad break. I know I love it. But we were talking about that transition from the RPG to the novel, to the fact that it's the first in a whole plan, a whole world, effectively. But you still got the characters, which you've mentioned, that some have evolved a lot from their origins to where they are now. So which characters do you think have changed the most from what they originally were in the game to what you've written now? And why did you make those big changes?
Oh, boy. So, as was our mission in this podcast, is we're going to, we want to give people a deep dive in the background of the novels they're reading. So if you've read the novel and you enjoy the novel, I'm going to give you a little bit of a little secret that you would never know or find out anywhere else. But I will tell you exactly how each one of the 6 main characters in the Dragoon clan have changed. And they all have had very drastic changes. So to answer your question, all of them. Darkflare was always, like I said, he was always heroic. He was always the light fantasy. He is always, in my mind, supposed to be the good guy. And he has flaws. And I think you helped with some of the growth and nativity in it. And he definitely, I tried to embody that more in this latest, in the latest version that went to print. But nowadays, he's got, since both iterations of the novel, he's got blue armor and spiky hair with a red bandana and a cape, big black cape that's got the Dragoon Clan's logo on it. Emblem, I'm sorry. Logo is way too modern of a term. But originally, if you've played Kingdom Hearts, he looked like Squall from Kingdom Hearts. Because Squall was always my favorite character growing up, and when I first started the Dragoon Clan, for whatever reason, the art of Squall wearing his Kingdom Hearts outfit had been out, but the game hadn't been. So I was like, I've never seen this before. This is like brand new. And so I used that as Darkflare for the longest time. And then I decided, nope, he doesn't have long hair. He needs armor. This is all gone. So Luna, when she was Renee, she looked like I should also preface this by saying when we were doing the role play, we all picked pictures of existing characters to use as our quote unquote picture because we all wanted to know how each other looked like and you could describe it, but also it's nice to have a picture to be able to refer to. So for the most part, all the characters looked like existing characters in media in some way. So that was the other thing is I had to say, all right, so none of these characters are going to resemble anything like existing characters. So I had to start from scratch on all of them. The person who played Renee picked Kid from Chrono Cross as her image. And so as I was developing Renee, I kind of made her look a little bit like Kid. And then when I went to Luna, I decided, you know what? No. Red for an archer is terrible. It just doesn't work. So I made her more greens and browns to be more foresty. And that was where that went. She also went from being a tomboy like jerk, for less of a better word, to more of a stoic but kind-hearted, close confidant to Darkflare, but still have her walls up towards the others. Attila went from being Cloud from Kingdom Hearts, but that was always the joke, is my friend who played Attila, he and I were Cloud and Squall, and then I went to... my friend is Hispanic, so I tried to give Attila more of a sun-kissed look, so he wasn't just your average plain white guy, because when I was recreating Attila, my friend said to me, no, he's white, make him white. I'm like, no. I'm like, I want to pay homage to you, so I'm going to make him more your skin tone, so that way, we also just don't have a cast full of white people, because, today's day and age, that's a thing. But I wanted to add a little bit of flair to him to make him a little bit more unique, so that's why I went that way. And then he kind of, again, this came down to he needs armor, so I gave him the battle dress, like the battle tassel in the middle type look, because I really thought that was cool. I gave him more of a fantasy knight type look without him being a knight in any regard. He's more, if I had to give Attila a class, he's more of a berserker, I guess you could say. So I tried to embody that a little bit closer. To be honest, most of these characters just gained armor, because for the most part, they all had like cloth looks. And I'm like, that doesn't really work when you're fighting epic villains and guys with swords. And like, you need armor. So all of them gained armor in some capacity. Kenji really didn't change too much. I kind of, he kind of always had this smirk. And as I was crafting him, it kind of became more of a cold smirk to make him more, something's below the surface. He's not as kind as he seems. And you first meet him, he's like, oh, okay, he seems nice. And then that smirk keeps coming out at the worst time. And you're like, I think he might be a little bloodthirsty. I'm not sure. Roy, I mentioned, he went from being kind of more or less, I say this very cautiously, but a kind-hearted, a good-natured pervert to he's more of the Robin Hood of the group. And Tessie went from being your 90s anime O_O face character to more of, she's a ninja. She's got to be more serious. So she's got some sort of PTSD that we hint at in Rebirth of Courage, but she is more serious, focused on money, and focused on staying to the shadows. So they all went through these drastic changes before the version that is currently in print. And I couldn't be more happy with where they are nowadays, because they actually feel like novel characters.
So, picking up on one of the things you mentioned there was about Attila. People have ownership of their characters, but you've almost kind of got a passing on of saying, okay, you take these characters, you do what you want to do with them to tell your story.
Right.
Was there anything from your friends when... So they've created these characters, and you've changed them to suit the story because you're telling a story now, not playing a game. Was there anything that any of them weren't as keen on in terms of the changes that you made now that it's your project and you're doing your own thing with it?
Not really. I mean, no, because I consulted all of them before I did anything, and I said, listen, this is the direction I want to go on with this character. And like, yeah, go for it. And I made sure, again, to pay as much respect to the original versions of them as I could, while still saying this is what we need to do to tell a proper story. So again, it was taking those characters and making them more or less what I had to do was basically create original characters, but slap homage names onto them. So everybody is kind of now at this point my own character, but the name is homage to who they originally were in the roleplay. The one thing that I didn't like that I changed completely, Attila's character was one of the hardest to make my own because, again, his player is one of my closest friends since I was in middle school. We still are very, very close friends. And he went through this phase in the roleplay at one point where, for my Dragon Ball Z fans out there, again, there's a lot of Dragon Ball Z references. He went through what was called the hyperbolic time chamber, which basically aged his character. Okay, so I got to step back a minute. So he made it so his character had a child. Him and his character's girlfriend, they had a child. And so he's like, well, I want to play as the kid instead. I'm like, okay, well, how are you going to do that? Okay, well, we're going to go to the hyperbolic time chamber, and Attila's going to become an old man, and his son is going to now become my character. I'm like, why are you doing this? Why are you choosing to go this route? And he's like, oh, I don't want to play as him anymore. I'm like, so why don't you just put him to the side and use a new character instead. No, I want to be my son. I don't want Attila there anymore. I'm like, oh, okay. So he became his son, who was a much chiller character. He was more hip and young, and like he competed with Darkflare over love interests, and more or less it kind of mirrored our real life friendship. And I was like, okay, what are we doing here? So he eventually decided, you know what? This is a terrible idea. So we're going to retcon everything that happened, and I'm going to be Attila again. I'm like, that sounds like a great idea. And so I decided to not put that plot point in the series at all. But it was one of those things I was just like, you were going to use Attila. We're not using his son. You're going to keep Attila as the guy. So I had to basically create Attila. I had to create Attila from a new perspective, and like how I wanted him to be and how he fit in my memories of him, but still making him work in a current setting.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I did not know that story at all. I have another question, which is coming your way, which I do know the answer to. I know the answer very well, but a lot of this stuff you said, I really didn't know. But moving on to stuff I do know, which is, relatively recently, there was a games expo down here, and I had, amongst many other things I was juggling there, some Winged Hussar novels to try and sell. And one of the copies I sold of your novel of Rebirth of Courage. So never judge a book by its cover, unless the cover's cool. And the one of the copies I sold was off the cover art, solely off the cover art, because someone it just said it leapt out at them, and they absolutely loved the cover art. So, what is the story behind the cover art?
Well, that's actually got a fun story, because the very first edition of Rebirth of Courage, the cover was Oboro curling his wings around a shield, and that was supposed to be the Dragoon clan's symbol. I had my friend draw it, and this was also when we were very first starting out as Winged Hussar Publishing, and we didn't really have much resources and very much contact, so I asked my friend if she could draw the cover. She did, came out great, but it wasn't, it was black and white. So Vince said that he would paint it, and so that's why the look of the original cover, unfortunately you can still Amazon it because it's still out there in the ether, but if you Amazon Rebirth of Courage, you can see the original cover, and Vince painted it. It was all well and good, but it didn't capture what I wanted it to capture. It's still a great art, it's still a great cover. I'm still very appreciative of my friend and my father for both taking care of the cover for me, but it wasn't what I wanted it to be, especially now that we'd advanced so far and we've been in business for over 10 years, and I've seen some of the amazing covers that do tell the proper story that we have produced. I mean, some of your novel covers have been fantastic, and that actually leads into where the current cover comes from. We have been working with Tommaso Dall'Osto on several projects, and it all came from you. Starting with Black and White, and you used him in I think was Downfall the first project we used, Tommaso?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so Tommaso was a fan of Infinity, and he was doing, fan art, and you approached him and asked him to do Black and White for the Infinity novel, and I was in awe how good it was. So we brought Tommaso on to do Hero Falling and Black and Whites. We brought him on to do Thick and Thin Black and Whites. John Leiby used him for Ergart Black and Whites, and then I even put him in contact with Mantic, and Mantic used him for some artwork for the rulebooks. So I'm all, again, as I've mentioned in the podcast, I'm all about working in the community to help support good people, and Tommaso has been a fantastic person to work with. I will put a link in this episode so that way people know where to find Tommaso. And if I forget for whatever reason, please bug the hell out of me until I do, because Tommaso deserves his flowers. So I originally reached out to him. I'm like, hey, do you do color art too? And he's like, oh yeah, I can do color art. I'm like, okay, well, can I talk to you about doing Black and White and color art? So I had always wanted, I wanted a picture of Darkflare, and I felt like he deserved to be on the cover because he is the focal point of the whole novel. So I asked him if he could do a color cover of Darkflare holding a ball of fire with the rune of courage in the center, with a Boro on his shoulder. I felt like that covered everything you needed to know to get interested in the Dragoon clan. Darkflare's a protagonist. He has a pet wyvern, and he can summon fire. And if you want to see what the Rune of Courage looks like, it's right in that ball of flame. So that was, when I saw that, I was blown away. And I will tell you, I have seen the black and white cover for the second novel, and I am even more blown away than the first one. So I'm really excited to see how that looks in color. But then I also got 2 black and whites for Rebirth of Courage, which was, I wanted all 6 of the main characters, to be visualized, because I don't have any official art of them. So I had him do one image of Darkflare, Luna, and Attila, back to back, Oboro flying overhead, and the other one was a scene that happens later in the novel of Kenji, Roy, and Tessie fighting a golem. And I could not be happier with the way that all 3 of those images came out. Like, Tommaso has honestly been a godsend to work with, and I'm beyond ecstatic. So if somebody saw that cover art and they picked it up just for their cover, that's 100%. There you go. That paid itself off. It's all worth it. And not for nothing, but it is also... Sorry, not for nothing. It does also capture exactly the tone we were going for with the whole 90s anime-esque style. It does capture that pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, he's I forget the phrase for it in miniature painting, but there's something it's like a light source. Basically, if a miniature's carrying a lantern or a I don't know, magic fireball, something like that, there's people who are very, very, very good at painting can paint it such that you see the reflection on the rest of it, and it can look really good.
Absolutely.
And it's almost like that's what Tommaso's done on the cover art with that. The way he's used light in what's kind of still a sort of retro comic book, or not comic book, more a sort of graphic novel cover kind of feel, I think he's done an excellent job.
Absolutely.
But you've mentioned the next one. You've mentioned more books in the saga. So, what is next for the saga?
So the second novel is titled Fraternal Requiem, and with this last version of the novel of Rebirth of Courage that went to print, I added in an epilogue last minute, like literally right before we went to print. I added in an epilogue, and that will kind of show people what the next book is going to be about. And the title sort of gives a hint, but when you read the epilogue and you see the cover art, I think it will be clearer. I finished the first draft of that novel probably 6 years ago, and as I mentioned, I went back to it and I said, nope, we are scrapping this. Originally, upon finishing the first draft, I wanted to just finish it, so I said I had finished the first draft, so that way, in my mind, it was like it wasn't just sitting halfway done. So I finished it, but I've always felt like it was 2 completely separate novels in one. There were just 2 story arcs that were happening at the same time, that had like one finished and the other one picked up, and I didn't like it, and I wasn't sure where to go. And then once I had all of your feedback, it let me see my entire series in a better way, and I was able to revisit Fraternal Requiem and say, all right, I'm scrapping this, I'm going to restart this part here, and there are aspects of it I'm keeping, but I'm rewriting almost the entirety of it. So I'm about maybe a quarter of the way through rewrites, but I am nowhere near done, because as many of you should know, my main job is editor, and so I'm busy editing a lot of novels. My backlog is actually getting almost as cleaned up as it's ever been. I've actually just finished 2 manuscripts in 1 week, the week of this recording, and I could not be prouder of myself for that. So I am trying to get back into finishing Fraternal Requiem, but I think maybe next year, after I get caught up with some stuff with the Mantic novels, I might be able to dabble back into it again. The second novel is going to see more of the world explored. The characters are going to go into the Eastern Kingdom, and they are going to see the Queen there, and they're also going to see a kingdom that wasn't mentioned in Rebirth of Courage, only slightly as a passing reference, but not one of the main 4. And I think readers are going to get to see just the breadth of this world. And, I didn't want to... There's only so much you can do in a novel, as you very well know, Mark. So I didn't want to say everything about the world in one novel. So this novel we have the characters, we have the story, we know what their objective is. So now we're going to try to flesh out the world a little bit more and see them explore it a little bit in looking for their goal. There'll be more races. The Akelians, who are lizard-human hybrid type people. They're human with lizard tails and scales, but their proportions are humanic, and they have human faces. They're going to be one of the main focuses in the second novel. There's a couple passing references in Rebirth of Courage, but that race will be more focused on in the second book, and it kind of will be. I think that's one of the main ways to show that this isn't your Tolkien-esque fantasy novel. I don't have elves. I have the Astrolites, which are elf adjacent, I guess you could say, but they're not the same as your typical elves. They share a lot of the aspects that are similar, but in my world, I think they evolved from pixies or fairies, so they're similar but different. I don't have dwarves. I have dwellers, and I know that the name sounds a little bit similar, but there are land dwellers, and there are, I think they call them sky dwellers, like the ones who are above ground and the ones who are below ground. And they have different, again, they're dwarf adjacent, but they're not dwarves. But the Akelians are different in the sense. One of the reasons is one of my close friends created the characters of that race, and then we ran with it and explored of how we could make it work for the Dragoon Clan universe, especially in the novels. And I latched onto it mostly because lizard men exist in fantasy, but they're not really a big focus. And I wanted to kind of make the races in my world not the same races that are in every single other universe. Yes, there's salamanders in some universes, and there are lizard people, but I wanted to make the Akelians one of the big races that are character focused on in this world, beyond just the main group of characters. So we'll explore a lot of that in this next novel.
Okay. Well, you did mention on that you're primarily an editor, and don't worry, I'm going to double back to that in a second. But before we go back to that kind of editor perspective of leaping over the other side of the fence, we have spoken in the last few episodes, not the most recent ones, but going back a little bit, advice for first-time authors. And you've just not quite been through the process of being a first-time author. It's not quite the same as first time, but it's certainly a new experience. Mm-hmm. So what lessons have come out of this whole experience that you could kind of verbalize now that might help assist a first-time author trying to work in this area? So
I have two big pieces of advice, and the first one is something I've said a million times on the podcast, is find people you trust and ask for detailed feedback. That is something I struggled to do. I would get feedback of, oh, well, this is good, and I could see how you got the influence for this, but I didn't really get detailed feedback, and I didn't get criticism. Criticism is good. Criticism shows you where your weakness is, and everybody's got weaknesses, so seeing criticism, not a bad thing. I take all feedback from people who I value seriously, and Mark's feedback was the most invaluable feedback I've ever gotten on anything. It really opened my eyes and helped me see where my weaknesses were, what I was doing wrong, and what I could improve. And now, I could not be more happy with the final state of this novel, because we were able to address everything I was ever concerned about. And I'm delighted with this. And just working with other authors in general, being an editor, that had really helped me to see, okay, this is where other people struggle. So let me make sure I'm not doing that in my work. And I could see where I was falling short and see where I was succeeding well. It's not bad to compliment yourself either. When I was reading my novel, there were things that I smiled at and I laughed at. I said, I did this so well. There's things that I underestimated that I forgot I did this. And even reading Mark's comments, it was fun, because you would comment I see where this is going. I know what's going to happen. Then you'd be like, oh, wait, this isn't how it happened. I'm impressed. I was like, oh, good. I could throw you for a loop even. So it's good to compliment yourself. It's good to see what you do well and say, I did do that well. But it's also imperative to take criticism at its source, if it's a good source, and factor it into how you can improve yourself. The other big thing I can say is advice that I should have followed, and I didn't, but don't make your Mona Lisa your first novel. This series is something I've been passionate about for years and years and years, again, since I was in middle school, and I knew what I wanted to do with it, but I should have, and technically I did do printed a short story before we did this, but I also was my own editor for a long time. So in a perfect world, I should not have written this novel until like now, until when I did actually put it to print. So you really, if you were passionate about a project, save it until you feel more comfortable with your craft. Write something that you're not as passionate, and not saying like that you're impassionate about it, but that's not your dream project. Start with something that you're like, I'd like to write a story about this. Do that, let it go to print, get the feedback you need, and then see if you feel comfortable enough to tackle your dream project. Because if you do what I did and did your dream project first, again, you're not going to get the feedback you need, and you're not going to have your craft as honed. So, again, it can only stress this so much on this show, is keep reading and keep writing, keep focusing on what you believe in and what you're passionate about, and eventually you will get to that point where you can do it.
I think that's fantastic advice. I'd agree with both of those, definitely, and I think the feedback loop, that continuous improvement cycle we've spoken about before, is really important. I think the three things which come out of it, exactly as you said, have some confidence in yourself, but at the right level. You can't just be down on yourself. You've got to say, no, there's some stuff I do well. You've got to acknowledge there's some stuff that all of us, we're not going to do so well, and listen to what people say, but also you've got to draw a line, and particularly when you're providing feedback as well, provide constructive feedback, not flames and insults. And I think that's the key thing, that if someone comes back to you and says, this bit isn't as good as it could be, this bit I didn't like, and here's why, listen. No author wants to hear that, particularly in the early days when you're not used to it, but it's worth its weight in gold. Now, I've been running this episode with an iron grip, and the timings are almost perfect. So I think we've got time for one more question, which is what we said about you primarily being an editor. And here we go. This after literally years and years and years of editing now, you leap over to the other side of the fence. So both as an author, when you're used to being an editor, and having someone scrutinise you being an author when you're normally the guy doing the scrutinising. What was that whole experience like?
Oh, I loved it. Honestly, I think it was the best thing ever. When you kept saying like, I'm hoping this isn't going to come off too harsh. Like, I did enjoy it, but blah, blah, blah. I was like, this is great, because I'm passionate about the project and I want to see it succeed. So if I can find a way to poke holes in my own work, and somebody who's looking at it completely objectively and saying, this is wrong, like this you need to improve on, this you're using wrong, it's fantastic. Because I'd rather it come from somebody who's trying to help me make the work better, instead of somebody who's just going to give me a harsh review without actually, any feedback. So you're able to find those issues before anybody else is. And that's my whole job, is to make sure that we're making the work stronger as a whole. So seeing that reflected, it was great. It felt awesome. And, I love you, but I did not take all of your feedback, because there are things that it's, again, as an author, there are things I can say, well, I don't agree with that, and that's perfectly fine. But there's 95% of what you provided me with, I used and made the work infinitely stronger with. So I think that's something that more authors need to open their eyes to, is because I have worked with authors in the past who've been very cagey and defensive about feedback that I've given. And I have to say, it's not about personal issue, and it's not about like trying to dissuade you from being an author, but I'm trying to say, this is what we need to make the work stronger. As an objective eye who's not as close, I understand what you're going for, but that doesn't mean it's right. So I loved having the perspective reversed and having somebody else scrutinize me and tell me what I needed to do, because it was just great getting that kind of feedback. I loved it.
Yeah, it's I'm glad you did. I was really thrown by the whole process. I think it's a really tough gig to review someone else's work, because anyone with a shred of humility is going to take a look at themselves and say, who am I to rip this down? And say, I wouldn't do it that way. And so, okay, cool, but you're not telling the story. This isn't the way you want to tell it.
Right.
So I suppose it's trying to offer those fresh perspectives. I mean, for me, I think that the biggest change I tried to suggest was that we've got a relatively light-hearted story. This is not dark fantasy. It's quite light-hearted. So, and it's a fun concept. It's been done before. It'll be done again. But to have our sword-swinging heroes wisecracking during fights, and that's fine. But when they're wisecracking during fights against people, it's like, okay, who are they killing? Bandits. Okay, what's the bandits' objective? To take the money. Why are they trying to take the money? Oh.
Yep.
Probably because they're trying to feed their families and they're out of work and they're starving. And we don't need to go that deep and come up with a whole complex backstory to every villain, but they're not coming across as that evil. So how about we go full trope and come out with some real, evil stuff to be slain to make the world a better place. But yeah, it was. It was a difficult thing to comment on.
Well,
but a fun process.
Well, I want to flip the question on you now, because now you've not only looked at my novel, but you've done some editing yourself. How does that feel to jump the fence on that one?
I never want to do it together.
Only for me as
you do it. Honestly, I don't.
Only for me as a personal favorite.
No, not that. Oh gosh, I think it takes a real mindset to edit, and I think everyone's going to approach creativity in completely different ways, as they should. But these stories, you need to own it as an author, and you need to tell the story the way you want to, and that's fantastic. That's great. But you also need to be open to feedback and to change. And sometimes it's not a matter of opinion. Sometimes it is objectively wrong. And when you tell someone, no, you have made a mistake here. What you're talking about is within my area of expertise, whatever it might be. It's very, very, very hard to work with people who don't see it that way, and which I know you've had to deal with a lot more than I have. So I think I having it's almost like race car driving, like a really low octane, dull race car driving sort of thing. If you're used to being the driver, the one who is responsible and has their name put on the car at the front of it and does the thing, but you're supported by a ton of people who you need to get that product out there, i.e. the mechanics, the managers, all this stuff. But then you flip it round and you go, okay, I'm going to play mechanic now. And you're going to watch someone else just make mistakes on every turn and every bend and not listen to you. It's it can be quite tricky.
Yep.
But when you do get someone who you're working with, who it's like a well-oiled machine, and you're working together, it's really nice. But I think you need a hell of a lot of patience to be an editor, which I do not have.
But I honestly think
that would be my answer.
I agree with you 100%, and I honestly think if I didn't own the publishing company, the family didn't own the publishing company, I would probably pull my hair out on working with some of these projects I have in the past, because it's like, it is very difficult. And I don't think people understand, like, it when I do these things, it's not just, so it's not a payday. It's not like an author, like, it's not a job as in like, oh, I need to hurry this up so I get paid. No, I'm trying to help build a publishing company, and I'm trying to put out quality works that will help everyone, not just one author, but the whole entire publishing company. Of course, I want to see every single author succeed, but as a group, we need to work together to make sure everybody succeeds. And I think sometimes both readers and authors can not see that perspective, because it's my perspective, and everybody sees things differently. Put yourself in somebody else's shoes. I get where people are coming from. At the same time, it's like, I don't think people fully understand that this isn't just a job for me. This is a career trying to build our company as something to continue to succeed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. Well, it's been a bit of a different episode. We exactly, as it was advertised at the start, exactly as said on the tin, we have spoken about a book written by some guy, which was about some stuff.
And
I think that's new. I think that's something new for us. So I think I've struggled enough with intros, ad breaks, that I don't think I can do an outro. So I'm going to hand over to you now to sign us off. until the next exciting instalment of, hopefully, I think we're back on the Oxford comma next episode.
So, for those listening, this episode I think is going to air in February, which means we are right around the corner for Adepticon for those in the States. And if you are going to Adepticon, please swing by the booth. And if you enjoyed this episode, you can absolutely pick up a copy of Rebirth of Courage, which I would love to sign for you. So it's also available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, our website, whpsupplyroom.com. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. I'm always happy to talk about writing. Also, if you like Mark hosting the show, please comment somewhere, because I keep trying to get him to do the intro, and he doesn't want to do the intro. But I think Mark did a lovely job on the intro, and I was giggling a few times off mic. So please let us know if you like Mark's intro. And as always,
I don't like doing any work.
You were lovely, much more charismatic than me. When you said we're gonna have the most charismatic American on the show, I'm like, who can I think of? We're having Taylor Swift on the show. Is she charismatic? I don't know. Anyway,
I'm not going to answer that question. I'll get in hot water. There's a word for Taylor Swift fans, isn't there? There's some kind of some
Swifties.
kind of phrase. I don't know what it is, but I'm. That's it. Yeah, I do not. Consider myself a Swiftie.
you do or don't?
You see, already, I don't. I do not.
Oh, so I don't either.
Already, I'm in trouble with Brandon. Oh, right. Okay, cool. There's something else we agree on. No, the greatest thing that your nation gave to the world of music is Creedence Clearwater Revival. I think we can all agree on that.
I mean, that's debatable, but okay, we'll go with that.
It's not. It's one of those things we talked about, subjective, objective.
Oh, wait.
Objectively, Creedence Clearwater Revival are the greatest American band.
Before we sign off, didn't you have quickfire questions for me?
Oh, I do not, I'm afraid.
Shot to the heart. I'll up your Creedence Clearwater, and I'll say Bon Jovi is one of the best things, especially as somebody from New Jersey. So shot to the heart, and you're to blame.
You give New Jersey a great name.
Thank you.
Good.
Anyway,
Good.
Thank you all for joining. Thanks for sticking around. Thank you, Mark, for giving me this time to be able to talk about my novel. We've talked with so many other authors, so it's nice to be able to have a little bit of time to talk about my stuff. So, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for doing the outro, and we will see you all for next episode, Oxford Commas.
Yes, enjoy.